Welcome to Is This a Great Game or What? And our special guest today is Joe West, who umpired more games than any umpire in the history of baseball. Joe, welcome to the show. This is my son, Jeff. He used to be an umpire.
Yeah, I bet he was a good one too, because if he knows the rules as well as you do, he did a good job, you know.
Joe, I learned the infield fly rule situations before I learned my ABCs in my house.
So, Joe, the first game that Jeffrey ever umpired, he's like 15 or so, and he's the base umpire. And there's a runner on first base, and there's a pop-up to the second baseman. And the fan standing right behind me screams out loud, "It's an infield fly rule. You got the call wrong. That's the infield fly rule." So I turn around to look at him, and he looks at me, Joe, and he recognizes me, and he goes, oh, you're the baseball guy. That's an infield fly rule. And I said, no, it's not. And that's my son. And the guy like slinked away. This is standard in the umpiring business, correct, Joe?
Well, yeah, I can remember there was a play in San Francisco one time, and there was a bunt in the air, and they didn't call it infield fly because it's not.
Right.
And so when they didn't catch the ball, they threw the ball to third base to try to retire the runner. And of course, the third base is stretched out, and the guy's out, right? Because it's not an infield fly.
Right.
Okay. So we had another play in San Diego years prior to this, and Ed Runge was in the press box, the old retired umpire from the American League. And it was a pop fly behind shortstop, and Pat Rocket went out and called the ball, and it was an infield fly, even though it was in the outfield. And so I called the infield fly. When they threw the ball to third base to Bob Horner, he again stretched out to catch the ball. And when he caught the ball, I called the guy safe because he didn't tag him, because the hitter was already retired. Now he had to tag him.
Right.
Well, the Braves went crazy until I explained it to them. And then they went back in the dugout. But Ed Runge had the time of his life in the press box telling them the rule about the infield fly, because he was in the press box at the time. So I made Ed Runge's day there.
Right.
So.
Joe, I worked for Single A, the Frederick Keys. I was an intern for them, right? And I worked in the press box, and these are professional baseball players. A infield fly was dropped with the bases loaded and no outs. So obviously, infield fly rule, you call one out. The runner on third, since it was dropped, thinks, oh, crap, I have to go home. A triple play ends the inning for the Keys. They're the ones on the bases. Ryan Miner is the manager, comes storming out, says, what is going on? Why are my players running? Triple play have the chance to score many runs in this inning. And they brought me into the broadcast booth because even the broadcasters were like a little bit lost and confused because nobody needed to run, but everybody started running. A triple play ends the inning, and they end up losing the game by 2 runs. So these are the things that even some of our players, and we don't need to get into this, but some of our players don't even know the rules of the game.
Well, I was working with Ed Rappiano in San Francisco, and Joe Morgan and John Miller, I think, used to do that Sunday night baseball.
Right.
And there was a ground ball hit to the third baseman, and he looked at second base to try to get the first out, and he realized he couldn't get the guy because he was running. So he turned immediately and threw to first. And when he threw the ball away, the umpires awarded the runner going in the second, third base. And they awarded the batter runner second, which is correct. Well, Socia came out to argue because he was managing the A's at the time. And he was arguing that his base runner had touched second base before he threw the ball to first. Okay?
Right.
Well, had it been the second play by an infielder, that would have been correct. But the first play by the infielder is what governs this in this case. So Joe Morgan is trying to explain this on the air, and he can't figure out. He says, he was on second base, but I know it's not right. He doesn't get the right to score here. And he's trying to explain to them. And Ed Rappiano looks up from his fork of pasta and he says, "It's the first throw by an infielder. How tough is it?" So they end up getting another out. And I called Joe on his cell phone. And he said, "Tell me what I'm missing." I said, "It's the first play by an infielder." He says, I knew it, but I just couldn't remember how to explain it." So he goes back on the air when they come back from the commercial. And he explained, "My good friend Joe West called and told me what was wrong."
But Joe, Jeff is right. You constantly, as an umpire all those years, had to explain to players and to managers, I'm not being critical, what the rules of the game are, because they are difficult at times. Agreed?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I can remember when I first started amateur umpiring, the pitcher would throw the ball to first base and throw it away. But when he threw the ball from the rubber, it was only one base. And if he was off the rubber, if he stepped off and threw it away, it's two bases, because that's the rules.
Right.
Anyways, just little things like that, they really don't understand and they don't know. We had a play in Dodger Stadium one time, and Jeff Bagwell's playing first base, and Biggio's playing second, and the runner on first was Mondesi. So they hit a line drive past Bagwell, who's holding Mondesi on. But when Mondesi took off to go to second base, the ball hit him. But since he's past Bagwell and Biggio is going to cover second base, he's not out, because there has to be another fielder behind him who could have caught the ball. So Mondesi goes into second base. The second base umpire, not thinking that Bagwell's in front of Mondesi, calls Mondesi out. Mondesi is going to leave the field. I come over with Jim Quick. We correct it. Guy goes to second base. Everybody, of course, the Astros had a fit because they saw the ball hit him. Larry Dirker's still talking about this to this day. And when I explained the rule, he said, "Well, I agree with the rule, but I don't agree with what you called." Well, that is the rule. Vince Scully murdered us because he didn't know the rule. And the next day, when we explained it to him, he went on the air and apologized for like 5 minutes, telling everybody the umpires were right. But I mean, little things like that, people don't really understand. And when you have a play that's as complicated as that simple play was, the umpires don't have a chance to really look around and see where everybody was. And so more times than not, they missed that play because they didn't know where the fielders were.
Now, Joe, a simple play is the difference between obstruction and interference, and people get it wrong all the time. Jeffrey Kirkchen used to still does, calls me every once in a while and said, "They called it obstruction. It's interference. It's not." Yes. So would you just, for our listeners, our viewers, would you just explain the difference between the two in as simple terms as you already have?
Well, obstruction, you have to realize the defense has to obstruct the runner from going to the next base. Interference is when the offensive player has caused the defensive player to miss the ball or to make an error because of his action. So it's completely opposite. It determines who's on the offense, who's on the defense, whether it's obstruction or interference.
Right.
That's about as simple as you can make it. But I mean, there's a lot of things that happen out there. I mean, when I can remember stuff like balks. The National League, when I was coming up, was big on calling balks because they had Kurt Flood. They had, even later than that, they had Willie McGee. They had all these base stealers. And the American League wasn't as big on calling balks as the National League was. And I can remember when Vida Blue got traded to the Giants. And the first time he stepped to throw to first base, he stepped right toward home plate. And 4 different umpires called it a balk. And he looked around like, and he went, "Okay." That was it. Because he'd never had a balk called on him. And that's not to pick on one umpiring staff or the other. In fact, I think it's good that they put the umpires all under the same umbrella so that we're all trying to do the same thing. But the point being is, you have to be consistent, and you go back over things like, okay, let's do the strike zone. Well, I worked with Lee Wire, and if the ball was in the air and between the dugouts, it was a strike. And I worked with Dutch Rennert, and he had a postage stamp strike. So the players knew what their strike zone was, so they adjusted accordingly. But it wasn't until they brought in the zone evaluation stuff that the umpires were trying to all call the exact same strike zone. I mean, it was, and that's the way it's been for years. I mean, they're still complaining about Don Larson's last pitch in the World Series, but I mean, and there'll be. I remember Bruce Fleming had a game with Milt Pappas where a 3-2 pitch he called ball 4, and Pappas had a fit because he had a perfect game. So after the game, the reporters come by Bruce's locker room and they said, "Do you know if you'd have called that a strike, you'd have been like the 13th umpire to ever have a perfect game?" And Bruce said, "Can you name another one?" and they couldn't. So it was it was just those kind of little things happen and they follow you around. I mean, and I told a story to your son just before we got on the air about John Boggs, who you know, and who your brother knew. I think your brother played with him or played against him or something. And he said something about me being controversial. I said, "I'm not controversial. I'm either right or I'm wrong. There's no controversy in what we do." And I think Yogi Berra said it best in his movie that they just put out in the last year or so. There's no pressure in baseball. Pressure is when they're shooting at you on the beach at Normandy. That's pressure. There's really no pressure in baseball. You go out and you do what you've been taught all your life.
Right.
And I think I've always said this to any young umpire that comes up to work with me or other umpires. I always tell them, you have 3 responsibilities, and your first responsibility is to the game of baseball. But that doesn't mean the commissioner's office. That means the game of baseball itself. Your second responsibility is to your profession. And that might not mean the union. It means the profession itself. And your third responsibility is do what you know is morally honest and correct in your heart. And if you do those 3 things in that order, nothing you do will be wrong. You'll be criticized for it because you got to realize half the people don't like what you called anyway. But if you do those 3 things in that order, nothing you do will be wrong.
Right. Jeff, when I did a story on Joe several years ago for ESPN, Joe told me, "I have never missed a call." That's what he said. And I laughed out loud. But Joe, explain what you meant by that.
I was out there for all of them. The first time I ever used that line was on Dick Williams in Montreal. How long ago was that? He came out and he said, "Just tell me you missed it and I'll go away." I said, "I've been here 4 years and I've never missed one." He said, "You can't be that arrogant." I said, "That's not arrogant. I don't call them all right, but I've been out here for all of them, so I've never missed one."
Now, Joe, would you explain again explain the circumstances where the base is not an island of safety? Most people think the base is an island of safety. Could you explain that for our listeners and our viewers?
Well, if you're forced to vacate it by the batter becoming a runner, you're not safe.
Right.
And the only time you would be safe is if it's an infield fly and you're doing everything you can to get out of the way of the fielders and it comes down and hits you on the base.
Right.
That would be the only time it's a safe haven. So,
right.
The base isn't anybody's until you get to it when it's your turn to get there. So I guess that's the best way to explain it. But when the batter becomes a runner, then you have to vacate the base if you are forced to leave the base.
Right.
So,
Joe, I have a question. So you called numerous World Series games. I believe you called a perfect game, right? I think you called a no-hitter for Nolan Ryan, if I'm not mistaken. So you've been around for quite a bit and had some incredible experiences. And I don't want this to be controversial. This is not what the show is about. So I'm going to go the other way around and say, was there ever a manager, because this happened to me in Little League, was there ever a manager that came to you and said, Joe, throw me out.
Oh,
and
yeah.
ask to be thrown out. And is there a story that you want to tell us about that?
Well, one of them was Terry Collins. He was in a fight. They were breaking up a beanball incident. And he got cut really bad, and he said, I hate to ask you to do this, but I need to get kicked out of here because, first of all, I'm not going to be able to continue like I am. And second of all, it'll make it look like to my players that I'm taking up for them. So we kicked him out, you know. I mean, Tony Gwynn, the first time he was ever kicked out, he said, if you think that was a strike, you're going to have to kick me out. I said, okay, goodbye.
And Aaron Boone, as you know, Joe, got thrown out in the first major league game that he ever played. He was out, he called out at the plate. I think he was pinch running, and he got called out at the plate, threw his helmet down, and got chucked after the game. I mean, that must have happened to you, somebody making a major league debut or someone you didn't even know, and you threw him out of the game. Agreed?
I don't know if it was their major league debut. I mean, I had some major league debuts that were very interesting. One of them was Greg Maddux. They put him in as a pinch runner and then brought him in to pitch. Probably the most famous first game I ever had was Dwight Gooden. He was borderline with Frank Cashin as to whether they were going to bring him to the big leagues. And Davey Johnson said, if this kid doesn't go to the big leagues, I'm not going either. And he's the manager. So they don't start him in New York at Shea Stadium for the opener. They wait till that series is over, and they start him in Houston against the Astros. And Davey comes out and hands me the lineup cards, and I'm working the plate, and he says, take care of my kid today. It's his first game in the big leagues. I don't think anything of it. And this wiry, skinny kid goes out to the mound. I think somebody got a hit on him in the first inning, but the other three guys, he just blew them away. And normally when you're the plate umpire, when the inning's over, you walk up the baseline of the team that's coming on the field. Well, after this exhibition of what Gooden did, I didn't walk that way. I walked over to the third base dugout to Davey Johnson. I said, this kid don't need my help. So, but yeah, I've seen a lot of people come and go. You know, I had, when I was in the minor leagues, I had an exhibition game with Carl Yastrzemski. And now I knew it was time to retire when his grandson's playing for the Giants. So the first base coach for the Giants, Yastrzemski, the grandson's on first base, and the first base coach looked at me and he says, who'd you like better, Carl or I think his name's Mike?
Yes, Mike.
I said, who'd you like better, Carl or Mike? I said, well, Carl was kind of grumpy. And Mike turned around and said, he still is.
Now, Joe, could you clear up for people who think there is something in the rule book that a tie goes to the runner? This is something we talked about when we were 5 years old, and there are big leaguers who still believe it. Would you explain that?
The tie only goes to the guy that forgot to wear one to a formal dinner. That's the best way to explain it. That's where the tie goes. There's no such thing as a tie in baseball. So,
but Joe, people must
the only time I've ever seen a tie was in the All-Star game in Milwaukee when they called it off.
Right.
Because both managers had run out of pitchers, not paying attention to what was going on.
But along the way, players, managers must have said to you at some point, tie goes to the runner, correct? On the big league level?
No, not at the big league level.
Good.
No.
Thank goodness.
No, I never heard that at the big league level. But it's funny because that's just a myth, you know. And the crazy thing is, you got to realize I helped negotiate the replay system. And baseball spent $45 million proving to the rest of the world that we're 99.6% right on the bases. Instead of putting money in the umpire development program, where you could afford to keep kids for 3-4 years till they learned how to umpire. They don't pay them enough money to develop umpires. They can't afford to umpire down there for 4 or 5, sometimes 10 years. I think this lady umpire that just worked yesterday over the weekend, I think she was in the minor leagues for 10 years. And that's a hard road to hoe because you don't make any money. I think the highest paid umpire down there is less than $30,000. You can't live on that.
So Joe, Jen Powell apparently did a pretty good job calling balls and strikes. I've said that the average fan wouldn't last 5 pitches behind home plate before they say, "Get me out of here. This is too difficult. This is too scary. This is too dangerous." I found the most impressive part about her, and I would about any umpire, male or female, is the courage it takes to get behind the plate when somebody's throwing 100 miles an hour. Am I overstating this, or am I correct?
Well, from a novice standpoint, I'm not calling you a novice
Right.
by any means. I would say that's correct. But once you learn how to call balls and strikes, the harder they throw it, the easier it is. The fastball levels out. The tough pitches to call are the breaking pitches, the ones at the knees, going to the corner, the knuckleball. I mean, the knuckleball is so hard to call, the machine that grades us can't call it.
Really?
I'm serious. The machine that grades the umpires cannot call a knuckleball.
So, Joe, when you had Charlie Huff or Phil Necro or somebody, was that your hardest day? No matter what, no matter if a knuckleballer had a great one that day.
My first game behind the plate in the big leagues, I had Joaquin Andujar and Phil Necro.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So I had a flamethrower on one side and the guy throwing butterflies from the other side. And so years later, of course, Necro said, "You worked that game, your first game, that was a great game. I don't think you missed but one pitch." I said, "Well, that's very kind of you. And what was that?" He said, "The knuckleball."
Oh, it's incredible.
That's
Joe,
pretty clever. That's pretty good.
So along, obviously, with the relationship with a pitcher, something I always valued in my, once again, tiny in comparison to what you did as an umpire, was the relationship with a catcher. Now, I'm not asking who's your favorite catcher to work with, because that is not the right question to ask. But for you, spending all these years in the league, who was a catcher that was nothing but respectful to umpires, you felt safe behind, that had the skill to, you said, I'm gonna be very comfortable back here because I got whoever it is in front of me?
Well, it's kind of counterproductive to say who is the best catcher, because probably the best catcher that I worked was Bench. But Bench had broad shoulders. He had a size 8 helmet. and if he didn't sit right behind the plate, you couldn't see anything. And at the same time, when I came up, the Dodgers had just taken Jerry Grody away from the Mets. And Jerry Grody might have been the best defensive catcher for showing the umpire the pitches. I mean, if he moved inside, he was almost on the ground. With Benito Santiago, we had the Sanguillen with the Pirates. These kind of catchers would let you see the pitches. Bench was hard to umpire behind and he actually created what they call framing, holding the pitch out in front of him, because he knew that if he caught like Yogi Berra did, you'd never see anything.
Right.
Because Yogi used to catch the ball inside like this. But Bench used like a glove that was almost like a first baseman's mitt, and he held it out in front of him to catch the ball. And so he's really the one that created what they call today the framing of the pitches. And it makes a big difference if you don't let the umpire see the pitch. It's a tough enough game as it is. But I would say that Bench did more for catching than anybody did. And the only reason Grody's not in his category is because Grody certainly couldn't hit with him. They could both get rid of the ball really quickly. In fact, one day we're in Cincinnati and Phil Garner's on first base for the Pirates. And there's a ball in the dirt and it hits Bench in the shoulder and it gets away and Garner takes off for second. Well, Joe Morgan's covering the bag and tells Garner to stand up. And Bench got to the ball and threw him out. And Morgan caught the ball but refused to tag him because he told him to stand up. Now, Concepcion's yelling at him. Garner's yelling at him because he told him to stand up. Bench is yelling at him. The pitcher's yelling at him. And Joe just looked at me and rolled his eyes, and I'm laughing because I know what happened. And they don't know what happened, right? So a couple of years later, I asked him about that, and he says, I should have just dropped the damn ball.
Right.
Because I told him to stand up. I wasn't going to tag him out after I told him to stand up. You mean that would be starting a fight for no reason. And but Bench did. He threw him out, and Morgan wouldn't tag him. So
Joe, our good friend Eduardo Perez once described you as an umpire, as the biggest stickler on rules, and we're going to play by the rules here. And he said, Joe West is the judge that sends a good friend to prison for 10 years because he broke the rules, and this is the sentence. But then Joe goes and picks the guy up at the prison when the sentence has ended. Is that semi-accurate from Eduardo about how you did your job for well over 5,000 major league games?
Well, I think Eduardo's missing the point that if the guy went to jail for 10 years, he didn't buy his share of rounds at the bar. So that's why I would go pick him up. He's way behind.
Oh my gosh.
Joe, you told me the story about Garth Brooks and Ed Montague in a spring training game.
Oh, that is hilarious.
Just tell that story. As you know, Jeff, Joe is a great singer. He sang at the Grand Ole Opry in front of some pretty good people behind him. So he loves music. He knows music. But tell us, when Garth Brooks reached first base, what happened?
Well, Garth had been in spring training with the Padres for years, not a lot of years, maybe 3, and he'd never gotten in a game. And so Bochy finally put him in spring training game against the Cubs as a pinch runner. So he takes his lead off of first base, and left-handed pitcher picked him off, and he's out from here to next week. And Montague called him safe. And, of course, Mark Grace, who tagged him out, starts laughing. And Garth gets up and goes over and hugs Montague. The crowd's going wild. Everybody's laughing because everybody knew he was out, right? So sure enough, after the game, the media goes down to talk to Ed Montague about calling Garth Brooks safe. And Montague said, look, I can call out Mark Grace. I can call out Barry Bonds. I can call out any baseball player in the big leagues. But if I call out Garth Brooks, I can't go home. So that was his comment to the media.
Because his wife loved Garth Brooks so
right.
much?
That's right.
Wow.
Oh, it's so good. So, Joe, tell us about the story. You umpires, you go out to dinner one night, and it happens all the time, I'm sure. Tell us about the steak dinner you ordered in Minneapolis that night, and you and the waiter and the other people at the table.
Well, I think that was when I worked my 5,000th game. And we go to dinner at this place called Manny's. And there's a couple of old friends of mine that used to play football that were there. One of them was Paul Krause, who played for the Vikings. And one of them was Dave Gasper, who had moved up there to sell his insurance stuff with Northwestern Mutual. And so we all go to dinner at Manny's. And Manny's was a big hangout for Marty Springstead, who was an old umpire in the American League and later became the supervisor for the American League. So, and Marty had taken us all there many times. And so we're sitting down for dinner, and they bring out these great big long menus, and the menu they put in front of me had it was like a spiral ring notebook. And so I knew something was up, but I don't know. And I'm looking around the room, and I don't see anybody looking at us. And so the waiter comes over, and he's going to take everybody's order. and I opened my spiral ring notebook up, and it's in Braille. So I didn't miss a beat. I said, I'm running my finger across the thing. I said, I'll have the ribeye medium rare, sweet potato baked. And so I did the whole order just and then closed it up. And of course, the entire wait staff is now watching and they're laughing. But yeah, they bring the menus to me in Braille. And I'll tell you another funny story about Braille. My brother thought it was the funniest thing he ever saw that the sign in the locker room for the umpires at the ballpark at Camden Yards has a sign that says umpires locker room, and behind it it's written in Braille. He said, why would they do that, Joe?
Joe, I go past that room every time I go to the ballpark, which is often. You're telling me I need to look for a Braille sign next to it?
Well, that's how bad you are. You can't see well enough to see the Braille. That's really terrible that you can't see that.
Well, now I'm going to start to look for it. But Joe, seriously, this is the life of an umpire, right? No one recognizes you when you're any good. They only recognize when you get something wrong. How were you able to deal with that for all the years that you umpired, that people didn't like you just because of who you are? Well, I shouldn't say that. They just don't like umpires, and I don't understand that.
In the beginning, when I was coming through the minor leagues and everything, that kind of irked me that they didn't understand what I did. And like I said before, you have 3 responsibilities, and none of those responsibilities are to make people like you. And I played football in college, and I noticed that the most disrespected people on the team were the offensive linemen. No one knew who they were until they missed the block. No one knew who they were until they missed an assignment. And they didn't get credit for the good things they did. So I was a quarterback at Elon College. And the first time they gave me the player of the week, I gave it to the offensive lineman. I said, this is your honor. This isn't mine. I only did what I did because of you guys. And they would die for me. They do. After I gave them that honor, I could have done anything in the world. They would die for me. They'd get in fights with somebody that gave me a cheap shot, So I learned from past experiences, and the big thing is sometimes you don't get credit for doing things the right way. I can remember the play we had between the Red Sox and the Yankees where Alex Rodriguez slapped at Arroyo's glove,
Mm-hmm.
and we fixed it. We got the play right. And what happened was there were so many people running at Randy Marsh, he didn't see him use his hand to knock the ball loose. So when they came out to start to argue, I told Francona, get back, we'll have a little discussion here. And Jeff Kellogg came down from right field, and I came up from home plate, and I said, did you see him slap at the ball? And he says, no, his eyes got real big. So I know he didn't see it. But when he signaled safe, we can't call this any kind of interference. Again, interference, obstruction. So we have to let the play go until we can get together because he's made a call. It's his call. So now we get together and we call all the other umpires in, and Kellogg, the right field umpire, and myself were the only ones that saw it. So we told Randy, we need to change this or you're making the wrong call. And I said, but it's your call. If you want me to call, he said, no, it's my call and I'll call. So he called him out, and they threw everything at us. They threw stuff from the stands. Somebody threw their car keys at John Hirschbeck at third base. And they were BMW car keys. I told him we should go through the parking lot and see if we could find them. And so I went over to security, which was in the third base dugout, where the police were, because if the Yankees win, the series is over and they're going to have to line the field. I said, guys, we're going to need a show of strength here, and I need you to line the field right now to show everybody we're serious. And the guy in charge said, are you telling us or is Major League Baseball? I said, well, let me put it this way. When I go back to home plate, if you haven't lined the field, we're going in. He said, yes, sir.
Yep.
And they lined the field. They arrested like 16 or 20 people immediately. And we continued the game. And the great thing about that was the next day, because the media took up for us making the right call, the Yankee fans actually applauded us when we walked on the field. And they lost the game. And that's the only time I can remember that we got an applause to come on the field.
That's amazing.
Wow. But I just remember I loved playing, having games with a base umpire or being a base umpire, because I would occasionally, with pretty high level Little League games, I would call a meeting with my umpire and I would tell him, I blew that, so I'm going to make it look like you're telling me that I need to change the call and you saw it differently. Okay, he is out, right? I don't even ask him if he saw it. And I had done that a number of times. Hey, did you see it differently? No. Okay, we're going to stick with it. But at least 2 times I can remember, I said, hey, I know I blew this. I reacted incorrectly. We're going to change it. Just make it look like you're telling me that you saw it differently.
Well, you know, what's really funny is that the biggest selling point of the replay stuff was I had to convince the umpires that replay wasn't taking their job. Replay was creating jobs because they had to hire 8 people to man replay.
Right.
You had 30 games. You can't, I mean, first thing Manfred said was, I'll give you 2 umpires for replay. I said, you'll give me 8. And he said, no, I'll give you 2. I said, you'll give me 8 or you can do it yourself. And the funny thing was the players were on our side because they didn't want a techie making the calls in the replay booth. They wanted a real umpire.
Right.
So we had an advantage, and Manfred gave us the 8. Of course, he gave us 2 of them as minor league umpires, so they didn't get pension benefits. But after in the next contract, he gave us all 8. And now, I mean, we had guys that would say, I don't want to replay. Now, if you try to take replay away from these guys, they get mad because they could they're going to be in New York for a week for a replay. So they take their families there and they shopping and sightseeing and stuff. But it was an interesting concept. And then I had to convince them that it's like having another umpire on the field with you who's trying to help you get the play right, because you don't want to be the reason that somebody lost a game or lost a no-hitter or whatever. I can remember when I went to Drew Coble's wife's funeral, and I get in the church a little bit late, and who's sitting in the back row but Don Dankinger, who had that play in St. Louis. And he knew that I had negotiated the replay, and he looked at me and he said, where the hell were you when I needed you? I mean,
Joe, but you're right. And it's not funny because we remember Don Denkinger, who was a good umpire. For one thing, I was there that night in Kansas City. He missed the call. So replay could have saved him, correct? And ultimately, no umpire wants to be wrong, Joe,
no.
With the system in place, right?
Yeah, and this is a perfect example. He made a call at first base, and the game wasn't over by any means because they still had outs to get and runs to score and whatever. In fact, the Cardinals made more errors than he did. But he was crucified, and the media murdered him. Jimmy Joyce had to play at first base in the Detroit Tiger game that cost the kid a perfect game. And he was glorified for admitting he was wrong. I mean, he got an award from ESPN for sportsmanship. And there's no difference in the 2 plays. Mm-hmm. And both of them, with replay, could have been corrected. And that was what I had to try to instill in people. You know, these are the kind of plays that you don't want on your record. And I was very lucky. All that you talked about, all the World Series games I had, and I had playoff games. I had a play in right field with Altuve hit a ball, and Betts jumped up to try to catch it for the Red Sox, and the fan closed his glove. So I called interference, spectator interference. And replay said I was right. Well, that saves you, number one, because you went to replay and they agreed with you. And I was very lucky. All the World Series games, playoff games that I had, all the stuff that you would call controversial, which I never did, I happened to get them right. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And the point is, even if I got them wrong late in my career, we could have corrected them. Well, we couldn't correct Deckinger's call. We couldn't correct Jimmy Joyce's call. And that we've evolved into a place where we're trying to get everything right. And the best part of replay is it changed the attitude of the players with the umpires, because now the players realize, hey, they really are trying to get them right. He didn't call me out because he didn't like me. He didn't call me safe because he didn't like the other. They realize that the umpires are trying to get the play right, which is a good thing.
Right. Joe, what about the ABS system? What is your thoughts on where it is and where it is going?
Well, I think the owners and the people have been on the commissioner's office to implement it because they feel like it would take the plate umpire out of the game. But that's not going to happen. The problem with this new system is it misses more pitches than the umpires do. The last 3 years I worked, we didn't have an umpire that missed 7% of his pitches. We didn't have a single umpire. I mean, the worst umpire didn't miss 7% of his pitches. This machine misses more than that. And the problem with the machine is when it misses a pitch, it doesn't call anything. It doesn't call ball or strike. It doesn't call anything. So when the umpire misses a pitch, at least he calls something. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? So you got a 3-2 pitch in the ninth inning, right? Pitch comes in, the machine doesn't track it. What do you do now? You can't work that way. I mean, the game's not perfect. Don't get me wrong, and all umpires are not perfect. By a long shot, we're not perfect. But you know what? We're out there for every one of them, and we're doing our very best to get them all right.
Joe, 2016 All-Star game. Nelson Cruz comes to the plate. Tell us what happened there.
Well, he came to the plate and he said something in Spanish to Yadier Molina. And the next thing I know, he hands him his phone. And Yadi turns around and Nelson puts his arm around me like he's posing for a picture. And that's what he was doing. He was posing for a picture. And all I could think of was, I can't even tell him to get the hell away from me because I got a microphone on. So I look out of the corner of my eye, and the entire American League dugout is roaring. They're banging on the railing and everything. And it was a classic picture too. But that was in Miami, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Joe, that last question for me here in umpiring, I had some very difficult calls to make. I had a kid catch a ball in left field, thinking it was the last out of the game. He took his glove with the ball in it and threw it. Like he caught it and he threw it out of play. And I couldn't tell if it was in fair or foul territory. And my brain was so cluttered because it was the 5th game I did that day on a 90-degree, 100% humidity heat. I didn't know what the call was. My point of saying this is, even at the professional major league level, there are some things that happen that are wildly obscure that even make a veteran and a legend like yourself maybe scratch your head. Do you recall a play that you think, what in the world do I do here? I've never seen that before. How do I handle this?
Well, yeah, and there's stuff that happens that you probably haven't seen before. I mean, there are times, and I tell people all the time, there's 3 ways to miss a call: lack of concentration, lack of positioning, and lack of timing. Now, when I say lack of concentration, that's paying attention to what you're doing out there. Lack of positioning could happen any number of ways. Sometimes the players take you out of position. Like we were talking about how tough it is to call pitches behind Johnny Bench. Sometimes he would take pitches away from his guy because you couldn't see him. Like there'd be plays at third base. And third base, if you'll notice, is usually where the majority of screw-ups are, because the angles are completely different, and they're usually always tag plays. Force plays aren't nearly as hard as tag plays. So you could be taken out of position any number of ways. And lack of timing is the hardest thing to teach umpires, because when they come up, they want to be forceful. They want to look like they know exactly what they're doing. So they call it before everything's done with. Well, that'd be like a judge making a decision before he has the defense, before they have their arguments. And that's one of the best things. If you have good timing, you can usually account for the fact that you were out of position. You can usually judge what happened if you wait till everything's over and then piece it all together like a puzzle.
Joe, you needed stem cell treatments in your knees in order to continue umpiring because of the beating you took, as so many umpires do. How are you feeling now in retirement? How does your body feel after all those foul tips you took, all those shots you took off your arm? How are you doing physically?
Well, before I retired, I had my left knee replaced. I worked the last year with a knee replacement.
Wow.
And then after I retired, I had the other knee done. And the reason I'm like this all the time is all those foul balls. But yeah, the things they do today, it's crazy. Putting stuff together. I had knee surgery in like 2002, 2001 or 2002 for torn meniscus in the knee, and I was back to work in 3 weeks. So I was very, I'm one of the luckiest people in the world because I have a great pain threshold. So when Dr. Cannell, who's the orthopedic surgeon for the Dolphins, did my knee surgery, he said, if you were a football player, I'd put you back to work. So I went back to work, and if you'll remember, Steve Yeager had the same surgery, and he was back in 2 or 3 weeks as a catcher, which is harder on their legs than it is on an umpire's legs.
Right. Joe, last thing for me. If Jen Powell came to you and said, "Hey, I want to keep my umpiring career going. I want to be a regular major league umpire." What's the first piece of advice you would give her in order to get to where she wants to be in this exceptionally difficult job?
Well, she's got two things going against her. One is the media scrutiny, which she's handled that very well so far. But because she's a female, she's going to get more media scrutiny than anybody. And the other thing is they waited till she's in her 40s to bring her to the big leagues. So her career is not going to be as long as it might have been had they hired her when she was in her late 30s. But the big thing is, I think she's doing everything the right way, and I'm pulling for her. I think it's a good thing. She's articulate when she speaks. She's smart. I think there's going to be times where they're going to try to put her in a corner and question her about stuff that there's no reason to. So, but they did the same thing when Pam Postema was coming up.
Right.
But this lady is going to be just fine. I just hate the fact that they waited so long to bring her up. But then again, they did the same thing to Emmett Ashford when he was brought up. They waited till he was almost at retirement age to bring him up. And of course, the American League had a retirement age back in those days, which was 55. And the National League never had that retirement age because back then the umpires were assigned to one league or the other. In fact, the National League wanted the senior umpires. They wanted seniority on the field. And the American League was not of that mindset at the time. So,
All right, so Jeff, let me just finish with this. When I did this story with Joe, we walked out of the restaurant where we had lunch, and there were a bunch of kids in the parking lot. And he goes into the trunk of his car and pulls out like 24 baseballs, like a big package of baseballs, and just gives them to these kids. Joe, you did that all the time. Don't be humble about this. You did that all the time, correct? Why did you do that?
Well, I didn't want to give them my World Series ring. and I have an account with Rawlings, and they send them to me. I don't think I get as good a deal as the clubs do, but they do give me a break on the baseballs. So they're actual real baseballs that I give these kids. And you don't think they're made of gold? Give one to a little boy or a little girl. They're special. So
Joe West, everybody.
And if I remember, you signed those baseballs for us.
I did.
They knew who you were. They didn't know who I was.
World's worst signature. All right, Joe. Does everyone still call you Cowboy Joe in retirement, or is that it is, right? That's your name, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you see my little logo here?
I love that.
It's beautiful. It's Jeff, explain what it is for our listeners.
We've got if it's a baseball teed up on a bat. Is that what we've got there with a cowboy hat?
Oh, it's a golf tee.
On a golf tee with a baseball on top of a golf tee with a cowboy hat on top of that. That is incredible.
Right. And Joe, you play golf how many times a week?
Well, at least 3.
Right.
Sometimes more, and the club pro over here at Bella Colina, where I'm a member, I said, Jay, how about ordering me a case of golf balls from Titleist and tell him to put my little logo on it. And he said, you don't have a logo. I said, just tell him. So he calls Titleist and he says, I'd like to order a case of Pro V ones. And this guy says he's got a logo. You have a thing for Joe West, a logo for Titleist golf ball. The guy says, give me a minute. And he says, oh, yeah, we got it right here.
That's okay. Sorry, Joe. One more question. You are a stickler on the rules. You have to get the rules right if you're going to play baseball and be an umpire. What are you like on the golf course? Let's say you're in a tournament, like it really counts, and I incorrectly mark my ball, which I did once in like the only tournament, and the guy I'm playing against called me on it, and he was right. What are you, who umpired more games than anyone in Major League history, what are you like as far as the rules go on the golf course?
Well, if you're in a tournament, it's your responsibility to enforce the rules, even if the playing participant didn't. And you have to call him on it, and you have to make sure that everybody's aware. If it's something like you just said, like marking my ball illegally, and it's not a tournament thing, then I'll say something like, if you're in a tournament, this is going to cost you a penalty. And they'll go, well, what do you mean? And then I'll explain the rule to them, and, they go from there. I saw something the other day, which is crazy. Person hit the ball in the sand trap, and it was up against a rake. Well, you don't have to hit it if it's against the rake. But what you have to do is remove the rake without the ball moving. So if the ball's going to move while you're in the trap, if you move the rake, then you need to mark it. Mark it with a T where the ball is, and then move the rake. And then if the ball moves, you have to put the ball back. Right? Most people would have no idea that that's the rule.
No idea, Jeff.
I thought the rule was if it hits the rake, you can just take a drop outside of the trap. That's the way I've always played it.
See, that's the friendly game.
Yeah, oh yeah. As far as I can throw it, that's what I say.
Right.
Those the toughest rules. I used to play a lot of golf with Larry Ziegler down here, who was a PGA player, and he's hit the ball right down the middle. And I look up and he's going in the rough, in this real thick rough, and one of the guys playing with us says, he's going to get bit by a snake. I said, snakes won't bite him. He said, what do you mean? Has he got some kind of repellent? I said, no, it's professional courtesy. They're not going to bite him.
A snake will bite the rest of us, but not Larry Ziegler.
That's right.
Joe, we could ask you questions all day. We've taken an hour. Thank you so much for your generosity today. A couple of little umpires here. Me and Jeff thoroughly enjoyed talking baseball and umpiring with you.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.